Coming up, from a deadly attack in Tehran to a diplomatic crisis led by Saudi Arabia and a statement put out by President Donald Trump. Some important and connected developments today. A window into a changing Middle East. We'll take you through it all. Plus, later, as Europe debates its future and the UK heads to yet another vote, we'll sit down with one of the key creators of the euro itself. That and much more is coming up right now on Debrief. Welcome to Debrief. I'm Nareet Ben. Several developments from Tehran to Riyadh today that together paint a picture of some profound changes underway in the Middle East that matter to America. We'll take you through it, starting with Iran. Two of the country's most symbolic locations becoming the site of two extremely rare attacks, ending with 12 people dead and 42 more wounded. It all unfolded over several hours, starting at around 10:30 this morning. Men armed with suicide vests and assault rifles, some dressed up as women, arriving at Iran's national parliament and entering a nearly 4-hour-long standoff. Some 10 miles south of that, the mausoleum of the founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini. Shortly before 11 a.m., two attackers entered that compound and started shooting, one of them setting off explosives. For the first time ever, the Islamic State terror group claimed to be behind attacks in Iran, the Iranian government laying the blame directly on its rival, Saudi Arabia. And this was the scene in Parliament just after. Wait for the chanting at the end.
This is a minor issue, but it reveals that the terrorists pursue troublemaking, especially in Iran, which is an active and effective hub of fighting against terrorism, and they want to damage this trend. Certainly, the security forces will deal with them seriously, and God willing, this problem will be dealt with.
This attack will definitely fortify the resolve of our people in fight against terrorism. All Iranian people and our military will resist against the universal threat.
Professor Meir Litvak is director of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies. Meir, thanks very much for being here. So we're talking about the Sunni Islamic State terror group, an attack against the Shiite Iran that has a Sunni majority. Why is this the first time that at least ISIS is claiming to be behind the attack? Why now?
ISIS is in a deep crisis. ISIS is fighting for its life, and I think ISIS is looking for some visible success. One thing. Secondly, Iran is a major force fighting ISIS. The Shia militias play a key role in the siege on Mosul. Shia militias have cut off Mosul in Iraq from the ISIS territories in Syria, and therefore they pose a major strategic threat to ISIS. It's possible that ISIS had tried before to attack Iran and has failed. The Iranians claimed several months ago that they had captured 24 terrorists. So it's possible that ISIS had tried before and failed, and now it has simply succeeded, and once it succeeded, it takes credit.
And it took credit very quickly as well. Do you think that the Iranian government will be quick to respond for its part, other than the statements that we saw?
The Iranians blame the Saudis because they want to score points against the Saudis. Right. I think that for the Iranians, they're looking now today about the day after ISIS. ISIS is no longer a major threat to Iran, so they would try to, let's say, score for the future. They're already fighting ISIS. They're defeating ISIS. What they want to do is get at the Saudis and further limit Saudi influence in other Middle Eastern countries. And this is why they blame the Saudis, even though acknowledging that ISIS did it.
And amongst all of this is a diplomatic crisis led by Saudi Arabia that also involves Iran. Before we get to that, let's bring into the conversation Iranian journalist Tara Kangarlu, a visiting scholar at the East-West Institute, in our studios in Times Square. Tara, great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So this is the first time in maybe decades since Iranians experienced this kind of terrorist attack against civilians in Tehran. What has the public's reaction been so far?
I spoke to a lot of people inside Iran this morning, and what they were telling me were state of shock. People were stunned by what they witnessed in Iran this morning, and This is certainly an unprecedented attack that they have not seen before. What they are saying is the security forces in Iran are telling people to be cautious, something that we're seeing in Europe, or we have seen in Europe after attacks as such. As far as the officials, the foreign minister is in Ankara, Turkey right now, and the president, Hassan Rouhani, who was recently re-elected, as well as the country's supreme leader, back-to-back came out and talked and released statements inviting people to unity and really emphasizing the stance that Iran is taking in this fight against terrorism. But with the folks that I spoke earlier, ordinary people, they were truly shocked, because this is not something that Iran and Iranian people have witnessed inside the country.
Tara, Iran is deeply involved in both Iraq and Syria in those conflicts. Would you say this is the first time that the public has sort of been directly exposed to potentially a blowback from that involvement?
Iran is certainly fighting ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and the Iranian people truly felt that tension today. We can't necessarily say that Iranians were distant from what was going in Syria, but one of the things that I want to bring out is ISIS has been threatening Iran for a couple of months very blatantly. A few months ago, they came out and said, we are going to carry attacks as such inside Iran. We did not hear much of that in Western media, but today's attacks are very telling of the tension between that group that, again, immediately, maybe an hour later, took responsibility for Iran's attack, and, of course, Iranian forces that are fighting in Syria and Iraq.
Tara Kangarloo in New York, great to have you as always. Meir, I want to ask you about Iran's Sunni minority, and if we can bring up a sort of map showing a little bit of where that minority actually is. That has been on Iran's radar as a threat for some time, this about 5 to 10% Sunni population in Iran. Has Iran made concerted efforts to try to stop extremism?
Iran is fighting Sunni radicals in Sistan, Balochistan, near the Pakistani border, right, where they have cousins both in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and this is the major problem for Iran. It's more a nuisance than a threat, because Sistan is in the periphery. It will never threaten the center in Iran, but the Iran government is unable to completely eradicate Sunni radicalism there. It's also have to add that this is the poorest area in Iran. There's also Sunnis in Kurdistan, which are another minority, and there it's more problematic because they have cousins in Turkey and Iraq, and this is frightening Iran.
You pointed to poverty. We're talking about areas where that Sunni minority is, where there's poverty, where there's underdevelopment, a lot of complaints of discrimination. Those are all breeding grounds for terrorism.
Yes.
Does Iran have a solution to that, or is it always sort of destined to be at war in some way, even ideologically, with its own Sunni minority?
President Rouhani promised to improve the status of the minorities, but he doesn't have much resources, and therefore he's not been able to gain much success. You also have to say that the gap between the periphery and the center is huge. It's immense. It will require huge resources to really lift up this poor area of Sistan and Balochistan or the Kurdish areas, and you have a mixture of ethnic and religious differences. It makes it more difficult for the government, I would say, to overcome prejudices and also to overcome the distrust of the minorities vis-a-vis the government.
Meir, briefly, if we're widening the picture for a moment, we're seeing a situation where Saudi Arabia has led a diplomatic crisis and a split with Qatar, allied with Iran. Do you think that that plays into this attack in any way?
I think it reflects a similar situation, that the Sunnis are failing in their struggle against Iran. ISIS is losing the war. Saudi Arabia feels that it has failed to dislodge Iran from Syria. It has failed to dislodge Iran from Yemen. It is not successful in restricting Iran in Iraq, and therefore they are furious that the Qataris have chosen to take, and you could say, a neutral stance vis-à-vis Iran and not follow the Saudis. This is, I think, an extra frustration and anger because of they did not succeed in pulling Iran.
Professor Meir Lidvack, thanks very much for weighing in. And a little more on that note, as he just mentioned, Iran is in some way part of that deepening division in the Gulf. More on that when we're back, and how President Trump is now offering his help. Don't go anywhere.